In 2022, a surveillance video began spreading across social media in Indonesia. At first glance, there was nothing unusual about it. A man stepped into an elevator, pushing a shopping cart loaded with bags and pillows. He nodded politely to another passenger inside, flashed a wide, friendly smile, then casually looked around. He appeared calm, relaxed, completely at ease. Nothing about the footage seemed suspicious. There was no struggle, no panic, no obvious crime taking place. In fact, that was exactly what shocked people when the truth finally came out. Because by the time the video went viral, police had already arrested a man for the murder of a young woman. And one of the most important pieces of evidence in the entire case was that exact elevator recording. The friendly-looking man pushing the cart wasn't taking trash out of the building. He was transporting a body. Today, we're diving into the case that shook Indonesia, the case of Rudolf Tobing. But before we begin, if you're fascinated by strange, disturbing, dark, and mysterious true stories, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new upload. Now, let's begin. October 17th, 2022. At around 9:30 p.m., two men were driving along Kalimalang Road in Bekasi, Indonesia. Suddenly, they noticed something was wrong with one of their tires. They pulled over beneath the Becak toll road and discovered that the tire had gone flat. It was late. The road wasn't completely deserted, but traffic had become relatively quiet. Rather than waiting for help, they decided to change the tire themselves. As they worked, they noticed a large plastic bag lying near the side of the road. That wasn't unusual. The area beneath the overpass had become a common dumping spot where people often discarded construction debris, old furniture, and all kinds of unwanted junk. Assuming it was just another piece of trash, the two men decided to move it out of the way. Then they got closer, and instantly everything changed. A human foot was sticking out of the bag. The men immediately contacted the police. Officers rushed to the scene, secured the area, and began examining what they had found. Inside was the body of a young woman in her 30s. She had visible injuries on her face. There were also signs of strangulation around her neck. At that moment, investigators still had no idea who she was. Naturally, the discovery of a body beside a busy roadway became major news. But what truly horrified people across Indonesia wasn't just the murder itself. It was the identity of the man responsible. His name was Christian Rudolf Merthe Tobing, and he was the last person anyone expected. Rudolf wasn't known as a violent criminal. He wasn't the kind of man who immediately made people uneasy. He was a deeply religious Christian, a family man, a husband with responsibilities. He worked as a therapist for children with special needs. He also served as a youth pastor at a local church. So how did someone like that end up in the center of a murder investigation? To understand that, we need to look at who Rudolf Tobing really was. Rudolf came from an upper-middle-class family. From the outside, everything appeared perfect. A respectable family, financial stability, a life that seemed comfortable and successful. But behind closed doors, things could be very different. As a child, Rudolf was frequently beaten whenever he did something his parents disapproved of. Over time, he learned to suppress everything he felt. The safest option was silence. Any attempt to express himself often ended badly. So he kept his emotions buried deep inside, year after year. As he grew older, he never really learned how to process those feelings in a healthy way. The frustration didn't disappear. It accumulated, quietly building beneath the surface. Academically, however, Rudolf excelled. He was intelligent, focused, and the type of student teachers noticed early. Even during high school, he developed a strong interest in theology and religious studies. After graduation, he traveled to the United States to attend university and planned to continue pursuing that path. But things didn't go as expected. Due to a visa violation, immigration authorities deported him, forcing him to return to Indonesia. There, he continued his education and eventually earned a degree in theology in 2015. His commitment to religion only grew stronger afterward. He devoted himself fully to church service. Eventually, he became a youth pastor at Castle Ministry Church in Bogor. At the same time, he worked as a therapist for children with special needs, a profession that required patience, empathy, and a deep understanding of people. According to those who knew him, Rudolf possessed all of those qualities. The church community admired him, He was always willing to help others. The children he worked with loved him. He was patient, kind, playful, the kind of person who would go out of his way to make someone else's life easier. From the outside, he appeared to be a genuinely good man, soft-spoken, compassionate, trustworthy. Yet beneath that image, something darker remained hidden, something buried deep within his personality, something no one around him could see. Through his work at the church, Rudolf became part of a close-knit group of friends. Among them were a man named Hardman, another friend named Shinta, and a woman named Adonia Rizabari, better known as Acha. These weren't casual acquaintances. They were the kind of friends who stood beside each other through everything.
The group spent a lot of time together. They worked together, prayed together, hung out together. As the years went on, Rudolf also began building a presence in religious content creation, podcasts, social media posts, and other faith-based projects. His friends often helped him. Acha, in particular, played a role in the production side of the content. She and Rudolf communicated regularly and collaborated on projects. From the outside, everything looked perfectly normal. A group of close friends supporting one another, a respected man of faith surrounded by people who believed in his work. But what nobody in that circle realized was that something had been quietly consuming Rudolf for years. At one point, Rudolf and Hardman went into business together. The venture eventually ran into serious problems. When it fell apart, Rudolf placed the blame entirely on Hardman. Their once close friendship collapsed, and that was where things should have ended. But they didn't, because Rudolf had never learned how to deal with anger in a healthy way. The resentment never came out in an argument. There was no confrontation, no attempt to clear the air, no conversation where old wounds were addressed. Instead, he buried everything, and he kept burying it. By 2022, he had been carrying that grudge for years. At some point, Hardman stopped being just a former friend who had wronged him. He became an obsession. Rudolf even referred to him as his arch enemy, not simply someone he disliked, not merely someone he blamed. In his mind, Hardman had become his true enemy. Imagine what it felt like then, whenever Rudolf scrolled through social media and saw photos of Shinta and Acha spending time with Hardman, laughing together, taking pictures together, hanging out with the one person he hated more than anyone else. For most people, something like that might sting for a moment, then life moves on. For Rudolf, it was different. To him, it felt like betrayal. They knew about the conflict. They knew what had happened between him and Hardman, and yet they had remained close to him. That was when revenge stopped being a fantasy and started becoming a plan. Hardman was always the primary target, the person Rudolf had obsessed over for years, but he also wanted Shinta dead. In his mind, Shinta had chosen Hardman's side, and that decision had placed her on the list as well. The plan was simple. Eventually, he wanted to reach all three of them: Hardman, Shinta, and Acha. His first move was a test. He attempted to find a way to lure Hardman to a specific location. Using social media, he contacted Hardman's younger brother and claimed he wanted to prepare a surprise for Hardman. Nothing came of it. No response, no cooperation, no opportunity. At the same time, another problem emerged. Neither Hardman nor Shinta were easy to reach. Hardman was in Bali. Shinta was in Semarang, another Indonesian city far from Jakarta. Two of the people he wanted to kill weren't even in the same city as him. But Acha was. She was still in Jakarta, and more importantly, she trusted him. Because they were already working together on content projects, he had a perfectly reasonable excuse to meet her. The order of the victims changed. Acha became the person he could actually reach. Initially, Rudolf considered hiring someone else to carry out the murder. He began searching online for a hitman, but finding one wasn't nearly as easy as movies make it seem. Most of what he found were suspicious websites that led nowhere but endless advertisements. And when he finally came across something that appeared legitimate, the price was far beyond what he could afford. So he made a decision. He would do everything himself. What followed was a period of meticulous preparation. Rudolph began visiting hotels across Jakarta, searching for a location with as few surveillance cameras as possible. He wanted somewhere he could commit the crime without leaving behind clear video evidence. At first, he found a place in South Jakarta, but when he arrived, all the rooms were fully booked, so he continued searching. Eventually, he found a daily rental unit inside Green Pramuka City apartments in central Jakarta. For him, it seemed perfect. He booked it for a single night. Then the preparations continued. He searched Google for ways to kill someone quietly without alerting neighbors. He purchased plastic zip ties to restrain Acha, and he developed a scenario designed to make her willingly allow herself to be tied up. No struggle, no resistance, no noise. And throughout all of this, Rudolph was still a pastor, still teaching children who needed care and protection, still smiling at people every day, still presenting himself as the same kind and trustworthy man everyone thought they knew. None of them had any idea what was hiding behind that smile. Then came October 17th, 2022. Earlier that day, Rudolph contacted Acha. He asked if she could help him film a promotional video for a podcast sponsor. Since they already worked together on content projects, she agreed without hesitation. No suspicion, no questions. The two arranged to film that same day. Rudolph explained the concept. The advertisement was supposedly for a health necklace. According to the script, Acha would play the role of a kidnapping victim. Her hands and feet would be restrained with plastic ties. Rudolph would play the kidnapper, holding a toy gun. The premise of the commercial was that the health necklace would somehow give her extraordinary strength, allowing her to break free from the restraints. It might sound strange, maybe even a little ridiculous, but when an idea comes from someone you trust, it doesn't necessarily feel dangerous. When they entered the apartment early that afternoon, Rudolph immediately began setting up the scene. He adjusted the camera, moved equipment around, pretended to search for the perfect angle. Then he tied her hands and feet. They rehearsed once. After that, he tied her again. And in that moment, Acha realized something was terribly wrong. The advertisement had never been real. The entire thing had been a trap. Confused and terrified, she began trying to free herself. She struggled. She attempted to escape, but her reaction only seemed to make Rudolph angrier. He struck her hard across the face and ordered her to be quiet.
Acha went silent, and then everything Rudolph had been suppressing for years came pouring out all at once. He started talking about Hardman, about Shinta, about how they had all betrayed him. As he ranted, Acha remained bound and helpless in front of him. Then, Rudolph picked up her phone. He opened her banking app and forced her to give him the PIN. From her account, he transferred 19.5 million rupiah, roughly $1,200, but the money didn't go directly to Rudolph. It was transferred into an account belonging to his wife, Christina Marcelina. Then he forced Acha to call her family. He made her ask them to send another 10 million rupiah, and they did, without the slightest idea of what was happening on the other end of the line. Their daughter was tied up inside an apartment with a man who was about to kill her, and unknowingly, they were sending him money. After that, Rudolph stuffed a piece of cloth into her mouth and sealed it shut with black duct tape. Then he walked out of the bedroom. He sat alone in the apartment's living room. The television was on, and for a while, he simply sat there thinking. Later, investigators would say that he appeared to be deciding whether or not she actually had to die. Eventually, he went back into the room. He looked at Acha and asked a question. If he let her go, would she scream once they reached the car? Acha shook her head, no, but Rudolph didn't believe her. He called her a liar. He told her that the first chance she got, she would go straight to the police. Then he said something that investigators would later remember. After my wife and children, you're all I have. He was referring to his friends. But you don't see me that way. In his mind, they had abandoned him, chosen someone else over him, and now he believed they had to pay for it. He threw Acha onto the bed. Then he began strangling her, and he didn't stop until she stopped breathing. Afterward, he placed a finger beneath her nose, just to make sure. No breath, no movement. She was dead. Then reality set in. Now he had a body to dispose of. Inside the apartment,
Rudolph had brought a large plastic bag with him. No one has ever known for certain whether he brought it specifically for this purpose or for some other reason, but at that moment, its purpose became very clear. He placed Acha's body inside the bag, sealed it shut with black tape, then lifted it into a shopping cart. To conceal it, he covered the bag with pillows. But he wasn't finished. He searched through her belongings. He took everything of value: her laptop, her phone, her bank cards, cash, gold, jewelry, anything he could carry.
Then, at approximately 7:25 p.m., he pushed the shopping cart into the hallway and headed toward the elevator. And that's when the now infamous surveillance footage was recorded. Rudolph was smiling. Not a nervous smile, not a forced smile, a wide smile. The kind of smile someone gives when they're having a good day. Another person was already inside the elevator. As Rudolph entered, he greeted him with a warm, friendly grin. For anyone watching, it looked completely ordinary. No panic, no fear, no sign that anything was wrong. No one could have guessed that hidden beneath those pillows was the body of one of his closest friends. After leaving the building, Rudolph loaded the body into his personal vehicle. He drove toward Pondok Gede, then dumped the body beneath the Becha Kayu toll road, the same location where it would be discovered roughly 2 hours later. The body remained inside the plastic bag, but Acha's toes were still visible, and that small detail changed everything. Police arrived. The investigation began immediately. At first, identifying the killer wasn't easy. Most of Acha's personal belongings were missing, making the process of identifying her far more difficult. Investigators documented the injuries to her face, the marks around her neck, and once they were finally able to confirm her identity, they began reconstructing her final hours. Who had seen her last? Who had she been with? Very quickly, one name surfaced: Rudolph Tobing, a longtime friend from church, someone she trusted enough to enter an empty apartment with. From that point forward, investigators began tracking his movements. And while police were quietly closing in on him, Rudolph was busy trying to gather as much money as possible. Around 6 a.m., he visited a Bank Mandiri ATM on Jalan Jati Makmur. There, he transferred another 11.2 million rupiah from Acha's account into his own. Afterward, he traveled to Pondok Gede. Eventually, around 9:30 that morning, police found him at a shop. According to investigators, he was attempting to sell Acha's laptop. Later, authorities would discover why. Rudolph allegedly intended to use the money from Acha's belongings to hire someone to kill Hardman. He still couldn't afford a contract killer using his own money, so he was trying to fund the murder through the victim he had already taken. Then, a day or two later, surveillance footage from the day of the crime leaked online. The first clip showed Rudolph and Acha riding the elevator together earlier that afternoon. Nothing dramatic happened. Rudolph exited first. Acha followed behind him, completely relaxed, completely trusting, completely unaware that she would never leave that building alive. But it was the second clip that spread across Indonesia like wildfire. The shopping cart, the bags, the pillows, and that smile. There was nothing in Rudolph's body language that screamed killer, yet the evidence was sitting right there in front of everyone, inside the cart. The footage was shared hundreds of times across social media. Within days, it had reached national television broadcasts throughout Indonesia. People began giving Rudolph a new nickname: the Smiling Killer. And when the public learned who he really was, the shock only grew. Because the man in that video wasn't a hardened criminal. He was a young pastor, a therapist who worked with children with special needs, a man whose job was helping vulnerable people. Even those who knew Rudolph personally struggled to understand it. Could the quiet, polite man from church really be responsible? Could the gentle therapist who spent his days helping children truly have done something this horrific? For many people, that question was harder to process than the crime itself.
Once investigators began piecing everything together, the full picture finally emerged. The resentment had always been directed at Hardman. Years of anger, years of bitterness, years of obsession. And the tragic reality was that Acha had never been the person Rudolph originally wanted dead. Hardman was. He had been Rudolph's intended target for a very long time. Shinta was also on the list, but on that particular day, Hardman was in Bali. Shinta was in Samarang. Neither of them was easily accessible. Acha was. She was the only person in that circle of friends Rudolph could realistically get alone. The only one who trusted him enough to walk into an empty apartment without hesitation. And because of that trust, she became the victim. According to investigators, Rudolph's plan after killing Acha was to use the money he had stolen from her accounts and belongings to hire someone to murder Hardman and Shinta. As for the smile captured on the elevator camera, Rudolph later offered an explanation. He said it was a smile of relief, a feeling that a burden had finally been lifted from his shoulders. He didn't describe guilt. He didn't describe regret. In his mind, what he had done was simply a step toward achieving his goal, a way to release everything he had been carrying inside for years. That attitude immediately raised concerns among investigators, because Rudolph wasn't behaving like someone who had just murdered a close friend. There was no visible remorse, no signs of guilt, no emotional collapse. When questioned, he reportedly said that he felt satisfied, that he felt the mission had been completed. Naturally, this led authorities to question whether a serious psychiatric disorder might be involved. A psychiatric evaluation was ordered, but the results surprised many people. The evaluation concluded that Rudolph was mentally competent. He was not suffering from a diagnosable mental disorder that could excuse or excuse his actions. Legally and psychologically, he understood exactly what he was doing. He understood the consequences. He understood right from wrong, and he was fully fit to stand trial. As investigators continued examining his background, they kept returning to the same place: his childhood, the abuse he experienced, the emotions he had spent decades suppressing, a lifetime of swallowing anger instead of confronting it. But none of those things excused what happened. At most, they helped explain how he arrived at that point. They did not justify it. The trial began on March 6, 2023 at the Central Jakarta District Court. It would continue for roughly 4 months. Throughout the proceedings, Indonesia remained captivated by the case. Social media discussions never seemed to stop. People talked about the smiling killer, the pastor, the shopping cart, and the disturbing contrast between the man they saw standing in church on Sunday and the man who carried out a murder inside that apartment. Then, on July 13, 2023, the verdict finally arrived. Presiding Judge Aden Abdul Kahar delivered the sentence: 20 years in prison. Rudolph was convicted of premeditated murder. The verdict matched exactly what prosecutors had requested. Under Indonesian law, 20 years represented the harshest fixed-term prison sentence available. The only penalties more severe were life imprisonment or the death penalty. The court cited several aggravating factors. Rudolph had murdered a friend he had known for years. The crime had been carefully planned in advance, and the case had caused widespread shock and fear throughout Indonesian society. There were also mitigating factors. Rudolph had no prior criminal record. He had a family that depended on him. He gave a full confession that helped the judicial process move forward. And throughout the trial, he remained polite and cooperative inside the courtroom. For Acha's family, however, none of that mattered. Her older brother, Destuan, broke down in tears after the verdict.
Later, speaking to reporters, he said Rudolph deserved the death penalty. According to him, Rudolph should receive the same thing he had taken from his sister. Then he added something even more painful. Even that wouldn't truly make up for what had happened. Although disappointed by the sentence, he said he would respect the court's decision. And then came one final detail that many people found difficult to forget. As the judge announced the 20-year sentence, Rudolph smiled. Even after everything, even then. Today, Rudolph remains in prison. There is no clear public record indicating whether he ever filed an appeal. Meanwhile, life in Indonesia moved on, just as it always does, but the case
never completely disappeared. Years later, people still remember it. It resurfaces whenever discussions turn to buried anger, to unresolved trauma, to the consequences of childhood abuse left untreated and unaddressed, and to the frightening reality that a person can hide an entirely different version of themselves behind the face they show the world. Because this was a man everyone believed was kind, a man of faith, someone trusted by his church community, someone admired by the children he worked with, someone his friends treated like family. And beneath all of that was a person capable of nurturing a quiet, focused hatred for years until it ended with the death of an innocent woman. The elevator footage still exists online. People continue sharing it to this day, and many viewers still struggle to reconcile the two versions of Rudolf Tobin, the smiling man standing in the elevator and the killer hidden behind that smile. The same man his church community loved, the same man children looked up to, the same man Acha trusted enough to follow into an empty apartment, a trust that ultimately cost her life. And that brings us to the end of this story. But before we go, there's one thing that's always stuck with me: the man who shared that elevator ride with Rudolf. Imagine being in that elevator, seeing a friendly stranger pushing a shopping cart covered with bags and pillows, exchanging a polite smile, thinking absolutely nothing of it, and then, days later, discovering that a body had been hidden inside that cart the entire time. It's difficult to imagine the shock of realizing you stood just a few feet away from a murderer and never had the slightest idea. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to leave a like and share it with someone who enjoys true crime documentaries. And until we meet again in another story, stay safe, take care, and I'll see you in the next one.